Welcome to Shad's Guitar Show. Whether it's the gear or the players who made the gear famous, this podcast is about all things guitar. Well, hey everybody, welcome into Shad's Guitar Show. Thank you for joining me for another episode. I just wanted to start by saying thank you to you guys who've been sharing the show. I've been watching my download numbers rise pretty significantly, and first of all, that just feels great because that means people are listening to the show. And I really appreciate you guys out there who've been, sharing the show with your friends and getting other people involved. So very, very appreciative and keep doing it. So today I want to dive into the world of guitar strings. We're going to talk a little bit about how they are made, the different kinds of metals and alloys we can choose, just kind of all things guitar strings, which I think will be fun. Now, a lot of this stuff, a lot of the terms you're going to hear, we've all heard for years. If you've been playing for any length of time, you've probably heard all these words and you've heard about these different types of strings, but maybe you don't fully understand what that means. And if that's you, that's cool, because that was actually me before I did this kind of dive into guitar strings. But now I feel like I have a much better understanding of how strings are made and all the ins and outs of them. So I'm hoping you guys will get something out of this and enjoy learning a little bit about guitar strings. And just an aside, because I was interested, I did a search to find out when guitar strings were invented. And they were originally gut strings, which is as gross as it sounds. And they were invented in the 1300s, but since none of us probably really care all that much about the origins of guitar strings, we're not going to discuss all that. We're going to move all the way forward to 2025, talk about the strings that we have available to us now, because that's when we're all playing guitar, and ultimately that's what we care about. So we're going to begin our story with a discussion about the construction of a guitar string. So if you take out a pack of electric guitar strings, that you use all the time, you'll find that you have three plain strings. That is your first, second, and third strings. And your fourth, fifth, and sixth strings will be what are called wound strings. Now, in the old days, back in the 40s, 50s, even into the 60s, guitar strings would have a wound G string. And that was because even the electric strings were derived from acoustic guitar sets. And even today, we find that acoustic guitar strings have a wound G. Now, the wound G kind of went away in the mid to later 60s because a lot of electric players were looking to be able to bend that G string easier as string bending became a thing. So guys would take strings from banjo sets and whatnot to be able to make that happen. But towards the late 60s, Ernie Ball was sort of the inventor of it. We began to see actual packs of guitar strings that were as we know them today, with three plain strings and three wound strings. So the place to start is obviously with how a string is constructed. Now, I want to go to the fundamental aspect of how a guitar string is made, but only do a flyover of that. I don't want to get into the weeds on it because it might not be all that interesting and it would take a long time to discuss every aspect of it. But basically, it starts with large coils of high carbon steel rod. That's much thicker in the beginning than any guitar string. So how does the string get to the proper gauge? So to reach the exact gauge, the steel rod is drawn through a series of progressively smaller tungsten carbide or diamond dies, each die reducing the diameter by a small amount, 5 to 15% per pass. So the process is repeated through dozens of dies until the target gauge, whatever that might be, 10, 13, 46, is reached. The drawn wire diameter is measured using laser micrometers and contact gauges that are incredibly accurate. So let's talk about the wound strings, and that is typically, as we talked about, the D, A, and E low strings on your electric that have a winding around them. A wound string has a metal core wire that we just discussed with another wire wrapped around it. Kind of like a really tightly coiled spring, and that wrap wire affects how the string feels, sounds, and even how long it lasts. All right, and before we go any further, we should talk about the core wire and whether or not on the wound strings, whether or not it's a hex core wire or a round core wire. Now, a hex core wire uses a hexagonal or six-sided center wire. The winding wire grips more firmly because the flat edges of the hex core bite into it, keeping the wrap stable and preventing slippage. While round core strings use a perfectly round center wire, the winding sits more evenly on the core, creating a slightly looser and slinkier feel. All right, so for the wound strings, there are three main different types. There is the round wound, the half round, and the flat wound string. And let's talk a little bit about each one of those. So the round wound string is like what 90+% of all players use. It's the most common string you're going to find out there and probably what you're using now. The outer wrap wire is round, simple as that, and it gives the string a bright, lively tone with lots of harmonic content. You'll get that really nice zing when the strings are new, and a bit of finger squeak when you're sliding the string up the neck. Now, these are perfect for rock, country, blues, anything where you want attack, sparkle, and a really great feel under your fingertips. The only downside, if there is one, to round wound strings is that they are harder on frets, and that bright tone can mellow kind of quickly as dirt and oil fill the windings. So as an aside, it's super important to wash your hands before you play your guitar every time to make your strings last as long as possible. Now, the middle ground is what we call the half round string. Now, this is not a very common string. You don't see them very often, and I don't think all that many players use them, but they are out there, so it's definitely worth discussing. Now, these start as a round wound string, but the outer surface is polished and ground down until it's a bit smoother. That gives you a tone that's a little less bright than a round wound, but not as mellow as a flat wound. They reduce finger noise, they feel smoother, and they can be great for players who want warmth and reduced string squeak. Maybe for recording or kind of for that more vintage sounding jazz blues crossover tone. So I guess in a way they're kind of the best of both worlds, but some players find that to be not great as they feel a little stiff, and they're kind of neither here nor there tonally. So they exist in this middle ground that, not a whole lot of players like, I don't think. And lastly is the OG of guitar strings, and that is the flat wound. So instead of a round wire that wraps around the inner wire, that outer wrap wire is actually flat ribbon-like wire, and it makes the string perfectly smooth. Flat wounds have that really warm, mellow tone with less brightness and more focus on the fundamental note. They're ideal for jazz, vintage R&B, soul, think guys like Wes Montgomery, George Benson, Joe Pass, Kenny Burrell. And these strings have a tendency to last a lot longer and have virtually no finger noise. And they feel really silky under your fingers. And they're really easy on frets. But they can tend to sound a bit dark or muted for genres that depend on attack and brightness. And of course, in our discussion on the wound strings, we need to talk about coated strings because they have become quite popular. Now, I find that a lot of times these are really polarizing. A lot of people say they either love them or hate them. And I got to tell you, I think a lot of people who say they don't like them maybe haven't tried them because they are kind of cool. But it's basically a regular guitar string that's been coated with a really thin layer of protective polymer. And the purpose of that obviously is to make the string last longer and resist dirt, sweat, and corrosion. And how that process works is the manufacturer will start with a regular steel or bronze string on an acoustic set. And they'll either coat the entire string, like you would find with an Elixir polyweb, or they coat only the wrap wire before winding, like Diodario does with their EXP or XS series strings. Now, the thickness of the coating and the type of polymer affects how the strings feel and, most importantly, sound. And some of the more popular coated strings out there are Elixirs, of course, that have been around the longest. We mentioned the Diodario XS or EXP. Ernie Ball has the Everlast or Paradigm set, and DR Strings have Dragon Skin or Veritas strings. All right, so let's transition into the materials used in string construction. So by far, the modern standard and most popular is nickel-plated steel. You'll find these almost all the time on pretty much every modern set of guitar strings. They're bright and balanced, and they work for almost any style of music. You also will find pure nickel strings. Now, these are smoother, warmer, and have, kind of a vintage flavor. Think 50s and 60s rock and blues. Stainless steel strings. Now, these are a lot brighter, really crisp, and they happen to be quite a bit more corrosion resistant. They're great for cutting through in funk, fusion, or metal, or anywhere where you have a really dense mix. A newer option that's out from companies like Ernie Ball are cobalt strings. They have more magnetic output, meaning a hotter signal and stronger presence. Now, for you acoustic guys, you'll find typically bronze or phosphor bronze. Bronze gives you a bright, sparkly tone, while phosphor bronze adds a bit of warmth and mellowness. So whether you like that zing of the round wound, the balanced control of half rounds, or that really mellow, smooth, warm sound of a flat wound, there's a set of strings that matches your style and feel. And here's the real takeaway. Strings are one of the cheapest and fastest tone upgrades you can experiment with. So try a few different sets, record yourself, pay attention to not only how they sound, but how they feel and how they make you play differently maybe. Because tone isn't just in the gear, it's also in our hands. Okay, so that's a wrap, no pun intended, for this episode of Shad's Guitar Show. And I hope you learned something about guitar strings. I actually learned a bunch, and I think this information can be really useful in determining what types of strings you might want to try. And as we just talked about, buying a different set of strings and trying different strings is a really cheap way to potentially get some great tones or find something that you really like, the best string for you maybe. And while best can be subjective, there is one instance where best is never subjective, and that is this. The best guitar player is the one having the most fun.